Bart, thank you for taking the time today. Pastor, scholar, cultural critic, and as I learned, just happened to go to a friend's engagement party. Also, fellow person who went through the LO schools. How are you doing this afternoon? I should say.
Doing well, doing well. How are you?
Doing good. It's sunny. That's always helpful. Right before
Yes,
it goes to like 90s and just an immediate heat wave. So,
right.
yay.
Calm before the storm. Get like the good of it before it gets too wild. Yeah, it's a good day.
Yeah. So I think kind of like just the way we connected is honestly like part of the inspiration for this Life After the Bubble series. Cause like I was saying, we are just uh yeah, just happened to come upon each other at a friend's engagement party. A friend of the bride, you friend of the groom. You just happened to be
Yeah.
at the table, and then somehow LO came up. I forget how, but it was like, oh yeah, this yeah, other people, not just people I went to school with, the students I work with post respond to racism, but there's just there's for lack of better terms, there's we're out here.
Yeah, we are out here. We kind of find each other right at the random moments. And I don't know if we got into like the side of the lake conversation, but those rivalries are somewhat of the reasons why people will know each other from Lake Ridge to Lake Oswego. And so that whole thing is another, those specific things you only know if you went there, lived there. It was like very, so anyway, I won't start too early, but yeah, that was an interesting meetup.
Yeah, yeah, for we'll definitely get into that. Me being on the Lake Oswego High School side, you being on the Lake Ridge side, and the yeah, how we get uh absorbed into some of these interesting white rivalries.
Right, banging like North Shore versus South Shore, and it's like that has nothing to do with you actually. But
Yeah. But before we get into that, I think one, just you being a pastor specifically, uh is interesting connection for me. I feel like I'm a very, very staunch agnostic, but also like the church was like a huge part of just building my sense of community, especially outside of LO, and having like a support system growing up. So like I'm always in that position where I'm just like I feel like this connection, regardless of how whatever like religious feelings I have to the space. But so I'd asked you offline on just pronunciation, so we're just gonna go through this again. Is your pastor of Rua Assembly Portland?
yes,
Did I
the
pronounce that right this
Ruah,
time?
the Ruah, you did a great job. The Ruah Assembly of Portland, and we know what's the funniest thing is the room that we met in actually was where we launched our physical gathering. So um, that specific spot is where we started having church. So I do believe in like all the special moments that build organic relationships and things. But yeah, we launched in the unbeknownst to us in the beginning of the pandemic. So we were all slated for a February launch, and then March 13th rolled around, and the world shut down. And I kind of was like, oh, I get to like get out of it, but of course we didn't. And so yeah, we've been figuring it out since then. Really excited about what the future of that church holds, and just what we'll do with all of those, even like memories, of starting in a very, very strange place, and what it might mean even for us to um, be learning about breath and revitalization, right? The church's name is Ruah, which is breath of God. And so our vision was that we would be allowing other folks space to breathe again. That's kind of the concept behind the name. But even more, we ended up coming to exist in the middle of a respiratory um, outbreak. And so I think all of the layers, I'm like gonna go nerdy for just a moment. I'm a big fan of Christina Sharp's work. She talks about registers, right? And so I think all of the registers of breath and breathing and of resuscitation are like really at the core of this moment of my life and just kind of the moment for the world. Like, what does it mean to return or to come back to life or to breathe again? Um, so, yeah, I don't know how that ties into the lake, but that is kind of our story for the last few years.
Yeah, no, and I think we're gonna talk a little bit more about kind of like how the LO experience is just like, shaped what you're doing now. But I was curious, like how long have you been ordained?
I've been ordained since what was this, May of 2019. So that was a big date. And then we were launching the next um, year after. And so, yeah, we had that event, and that was in person. It was actually one of my like last in person things. And that week was very important there in Seattle. And so, um, yeah, it's been a been a trip
Yeah.
just to watch the world change around you, and slowly, what are we like? I guess out of endemic and technically, back. Um, and then again, like let me just take it all the way, right? We're talking about like life beyond the bubbles. So we had our bubbles and pods and stuff during COVID, and I think we're all trying to figure out what it means now to go out into life completely or more fully. Um, so yeah, that has been an interesting road. And so the coinciding, right, of my ordination, that last pretty epic summer that folks had for a lot of us in 2019, that we just kind of thought we were going to do all again. We're like,
Mhm.
oh, we're in the roaring 20s, right? Everyone had this like great understanding of what it would be. And it's like, actually, it's not what we're about to do. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, we had plans, and God, or however we identify the world, laughed and is still laughing, I think. And yeah, I'm just rolling with all of the punches that come along with um, being in the world and not being in control. If I learned anything, I suppose I've learned that.
Yeah, yeah. And in addition, again, to being a pastor, you wear a number of other different hats. Again, we talk about scholar, cultural critic, curator, the legendary agency. Can you just talk a little bit about some of that work, especially in sort of like the area of arts curation?
Sure, sure. Specifically, I guess we'll deal with like a specific like date. This last Thursday, I just performed for all intents and purposes at Reed Arts Week at Reed College for their it's called Peripheral Forms, and very interesting like lineup that they had. I was really honored to be there. Um, but I also remember like my father driving me from Lake O to read some mornings, and just that right, that experience of kind of expanding the bubble, because you get this like Lake O, Westmoreland, Selwood sort of thing. I believe like before that new seasons in Palisades was there, when it was like lambs, we would drive to the Selwood um, new seasons. And so just kind of a full circle moment there, going back to read and having that experience. So yeah, that's me being curated right into art spaces, but also that just being an outgrowth of my participation in the local contemporary arts community here in Portland, specifically with performance art. So PICA has showcased a lot of my work, as well as Reed College a few times prior, along with multiple like lectures at all these schools. And um, what's that other one up there? It's not like Oswego, but it's um, this might what's the place? This college, Lewis and Clark, and all these various institutions that I'm grateful for, because I get to use um, all of the currents, I think, right, of my um, faith and academic like knowledge when I go to these spaces. So, for instance, um, the drama department at Lewis and Clark did a play called The Christians, and then their um, first year symposium um, always invites like a visiting lecturer, and so who else would come and do that visiting lecture, but a person who studies the faith, is a Christian pastor, and also has the chops, whatever, to do performance critique. And so that sort of um, alignment and an intentional congruency, to think about it in that way, um, has really been my calling card. So I'm not like ever looking or like scouting out a bunch of opportunities, because they're really like clear cut and defined. Like there's nobody else that could have called. They're like, oh, we're doing a thing on Black Christians from Lake Oswego, or whatever, what have you. And then I'm like, oh, hey, I'm here. So, um, yeah, hopefully that kind of summed it up. But I've been um, in and around these spaces um, for quite some time, perhaps a privilege of experience or exposure, even at least. Um, to just be able to go into these spaces where they're literally, still um, having to do active outreach and hire folks on to say, hey, how do we get more people of color in the audiences? How do we um, do outreach to these communities that aren't normally in our audiences? So yeah, that's the day to day life there.
Yeah, and I feel that with my dad was part of I was at still is a member of Rotary out in that same Southwest area.
Wow.
So yeah, you talk about those drives out there and kind of like going out that like Westmoreland area. Yeah, I just I can relate.
My
Speaking,
grandfather was a Rotary Club member, and so um, remember always like seeing that sign and being one of the few people who like knew what it meant, and then um, and just some of those, oh, so funny, some of those connections, because like now, of course, art world, you have the Black guy in the art scene and the scholar at the school, and so everyone needs you at their table at the gala, and so they introduce you to some commissioner or something, and I'm like, yeah, he's friends with my. It's a very small, nebulous sort of world, and I'm not jaded completely by it, but I'm like, okay, yeah, like none of this is new for me, and so that has been an interesting way of interacting with a lot of folks, especially who feel like sort of honored to be in the room. You just
mm,
said this on your you literally just posted this on Insta, and I wanted to like retweet it or something or however, but you were just like, I've been with white people with money my whole life. This is not this is actually what I don't feel like doing. Um so yeah, I totally resonated with that. Um yeah, hope I didn't share too much, but I'm right? You posted that.
yeah,
Okay.
something along the lines of just like yeah, being with when you're around white people with money, and then you come into like you said, you go into these spaces where there's almost like this expectation that we as like the black person who they'll acknowledge the expertise or at least the need for our perspective in the room, but then also
Right.
there's this expectation that we should be honored just to be
Exactly.
in the room with them. And it's just like,
Yeah. I'm
no,
like, not too
and you
much.
need me. Why are we
I'm
doing
like, you should
this?
be honored that I'm here. Um, yeah, it's a very interesting phenomena, because I see it all the time. And you saying that, I was like, ah, this like this right here. So yeah, I am completely there with you on that.
Yeah, it's again while I'm talking about your grandfather being Rotary, like again, kind of like just getting to the again the genesis of this interview that is wild where again you're South Shore, I'm North Shore, and that can be it's not actually in all aspects of geography of Oregon. It's not exactly that far in
Right, exactly.
any
Yeah.
respects, but we can just kind of like come into each other's spheres almost randomly,
Yeah.
many years later. But yeah, just to bring that back. So you went through Oh, it wouldn't have been Lake Ridge. It would have been Waluga
Yep,
right
I
there.
did with Luga, and it was over the course of 2 years. And like even about this geography question, right? So we lived um, above what like we considered the bubble, like right above George Rogers Park. And so like literally Saturday mornings, I wake up to like the jazz in the park, and like we're going and feeding ducks, and um, my mom is just like happily walking down and around 43 to like go get her nails done. It's a very like um, simple kind of like idyllic life. Of course, like you know the image that is painted of like whatever like Oswego could be. And so, yeah, like that park, that space, that area, and really, um, I guess it would be Cruz that like divides, but it's literally like a stretch of like maybe not even a mile that separates um, Lake O from Lake Ridge. And so it's just like this is not an actual thing. These shores are like created anyway. Um, so yeah, that comparison is always so funny, but people stuck to it. So yeah, Waluga, which is the junior high school that feeds into um, the Lake Ridge Go Pacers, and yeah, that was interesting to not graduate through because you know eighth grade especially really builds you up for that high school experience. And everyone's so excited. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna actually go to a Catholic school. And that was an interesting transition to make as well.
Yeah, you just talk a little bit more kind of about what it was like at Waluga and then what kind of like sparked the decision to go to, I want to say De La Salle, North Catholic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, ended up at De La
Yeah,
Salle.
yeah.
It was ultimately that, right? I think I was at Waluga wanting to go to Jesuit, and my parents was like, nah, like we've seen this, and that's not what we're gonna do. Um, So yeah, I get to Maluga actually from St. Andrew. My parents had made the move to Lake Oswego, and I think that we really did enjoy the transition. What's now like Whole Foods was Albertsons at the time, I think, in that area. Um, my sister ended up getting um, like a high school job there, and so it was um, kind of a simple sort of um, thing. We knew that we had a lot of responsibilities in like northern Northeast Portland in the daytime or whatever, but we knew that also when we got home, we had a really cool, neighborhood and enclave where we could just kind of be and relax. And so um, the transition into like a Northeast Portland um, Catholic, but um, interesting context there at St. Andrew. Every morning, that commute got to be a little much, and then I acted wild. I can't even hold it. I had some um, interesting, like interestingly read behavioral issues um, at St. Andrew, but that didn't really. I'll say manifest in like Oswego because they weren't the things um, that children were chided for in these spaces. So what we might call, smart talking in a Black community um, was just more acceptable out in like Oswego. So I had no behavioral issues there. None of that was like really looked at. I had a talent that got me in the chamber choir, which meant a lot of traveling around and stuff there at Waluga. And of course, just academically, was thrown into like all the AP courses and was like reading Wuthering Heights in the eighth grade there. I remember that like so specifically. And not really knowing that we were like slowly having an introduction to um the classics, but like maybe just being interested in Heathcliff and like what this meant, like what these ideas meant in this work. Um, but even without, and this is an interesting thing, I don't know how specific my experience is, um, but for either of those situations, I didn't need to take a test or I didn't need to like um, say anything specifically about um, what I could do in those rooms. It was like, oh, you said that you were this here, so like now you're this here. We're accepting the fact that um we see that there's some, talent. So there was no like string of papers or like voice tests for for the chamber choir or whatever. It was just like, oh, you did this here, and so like this is we'll let you into our groups as well. And I guess I'm trying to make a comparison of um, what sometimes in the Black community is a commitment um, to the rigor of the system that folks who are embedded in the system don't really get caught up in as much. Um, and of course, that's security and like knowing how things work. Um, but there was this ease again, like I'm saying, right? We're like in the bubble and feeding the ducks, and like it's it's nothing going on. I won't even say that um I was having out family was always strong, like on a black consciousness, but there um wasn't, for me at least, a bunch of major news being reported often about the plight of black men and the everyday things. So we were really kind of caught up um in the ease of um living in a white enclave, and I ate it up. I'm and I think the testament now of being I'm pretty solid, I think, as far as like a black identity consciousness is, right? And even um I think most people would like, if they could mark me in like an Afro pessimist space, like that's kind of where I land. Now, perhaps learning what was happening later is what got me there. But I guess I'm saying I'm grateful that all those experiences shaped me in such a way to um, have seen um, the truth of it. But yeah, no blatant like um, interactions. I was sort of cherish, right? It's kind of getting back to this idea of sitting at those tables where it's like, oh, you should be honored that you're here, but also we do need you because you represent some sort of a stereotype breaker, right? Like, yeah, you're the black kid, but you're also the smart kid, and you can, move and you know how to act, and your parents are together, the whole thing. Like, you really come and you show up ultimately and become their champion. Like you're the hero for the story that they want to prove about how Black folks can do and be uh, in the state. So I'm a pastor also. I can talk at length, but I'll digress there.
Yeah, but that's a really important point just about, well, the number of them. But like even when you just talk about the ease of just like the environment, because I go back and forth with LO. On one hand, it's like when I was living with my parents out after college there, I love taking walks actually down through downtown and over, to around George Rogers. And it's just like, and also there's, Tryon Creek right there. So, it's just like, it's nice. These, even the same way people from like out of state will always be like, you just take all these trees for granted. It's like, there's that feel. And then just some of the other stuff, having access to some of these programs. And also, yeah, when you talk about, uh, like that commitment to rigor that is not always practiced in these white communities. And just for, again, because of there's the access to it, there's not not the worry that this program is ever going to be shut down because the LO Schools Foundation or whoever make sure it never will.
Right.
But even with like I always like to ask people as far as like when you were first became aware of sort of like the Lake No Negro nickname, because I know for me it was probably like eighth grade, and I had dealt with
Mhm.
number of incidents and stuff before then, but it just happened to be because yeah, it wasn't even, it was like a secondhand story from, it was like eighth grade spring basketball with some friends, well, not friends, but some acquaintances who were on another team who, was kind of like mixed with like LO kids and Portland kids. And it just kind of like came up. And of course, I'm the black person at school, so I have to come back and, Bruce, have you heard
Right.
this before? It's like no Negro. But yeah, I'm just curious, like when did that come into your consciousness?
I think our parents warned us going. Um, and that was like kind of present. I don't know that it ever came to me from like um any of like my white peers, but we and this is funny, like you're talking about Tyron, Fort Tyron, you have this that's fine, like right on 43, and it's like Tree City, USA. And so we were like, oh, we're not like the Negro. We live in Tree City. Like we're claiming like, all the good parts. I mean, but we knew it was like no Negro, right? And I think even within our social circles as a family, we kind of like played with that a little bit, maybe. And not so much embrace. But we would, let folks know like, hey, you come to our house for Thanksgiving or for a barbecue or whatever, you kind of need to like stay all day. You kind of need to like come to the house. It's like it's far enough away from the city to sort of retreat. And so we're gonna be here. We're gonna be in the house. We're not doing like a whole bunch of store runs and all that. Like we're coming out here. You're gonna sit down and enjoy like whatever's happening um, here. And so that was more of an internal thing. And I'm pretty grateful that my parents were the ones who introduced me to the nickname. Or I mean, that's not a it's not a light thing, but who introduced me right, to that idea. Um, and so yeah, we kind of went aware of what we were getting ourselves into. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it was very, just on your parents' part, very intentional in terms of uh building community, both sounds like both in and outside of LO.
Oh yeah,
But
for sure. I don't know that we ever really got into. Oh, so there is this 100 Black Women of Lake Oswego group, and I don't think my mother ever got tapped or invited, right, to be in the group, or if it was even around yet. But when so currently a friend of mine lives right in the heart of downtown Lake Oswego, and so I'm always with her, like, hey, this is like where I grew up at, or here's like, this is what like, what we did. Um, and so she now, when we were introduced to that program, was like, what? Like, are you serious? There's like, and then, of course, that gets into the like organization of so many things. And she's like, do you know about this good in the hood thing? And I was like, yeah, love, that's it. Like that's in the city. She's like, but the women in like Oswego are planning the good in the hood. And I'm like, yeah, like, okay. It's starting to make more sense now, but there's so much I think that we didn't know or didn't even open ourselves up to, right? Because we had the like no Negro idea. And that's probably why like our families never met or whatever. Um, because you live by that. And I say this all the time about Portland. When we perpetuate this idea of like whitest major city, it literally doesn't allow for the people who are Black in the city to even look for where they might find Black cultural space or presence. Um, so who knows, right? We might have been like either avoiding or seeing or like making the assumption that like Black folks out there don't want to be fooled with, like don't want to talk to other Black people. Um, when in reality, there were some spaces that were like thriving or trying to make sense of the realities that they were in.
yeah, and I think I'm correct on like the group you're talking about. That is Denise's group, Denise Milholland,
Yes,
who also, again, another
that's
person
yeah,
who
like
my parents, like it was my parents from also same church, Ainsworth UCC in Portland from back in the day. So it's just all these intersections that again
yeah,
where we find each other outside of
yeah. Meeting Miss
LO.
Denise actually was at a party at George Washington's Park. We were there with a group of people who they're living in Mountain Park now, but ended up um, we there was a group of folks that are there. They went to Howard, so I met them from my Howard friends, and they ended up in Lake Oswego. And so I'm like, oh, let me show you the ropes. And then of course they introduced me to people that I wasn't even aware of that are in the city again because of that. Like, but like you're saying, like you have your Ainsworth in Northeast Portland, and then you go home to like Oswego, and if you meet somebody else, that's in that community, you can connect that way. But otherwise, I think my mom had another. There was like one physician at her workplace whose daughter was in my class, and so we just like connected on that. But outside of that, I think the people that we were aware of that were also living in our neighborhoods were Kevin Love and some other older like NBA players that we might see at Albertsons or Senior Taco or like whatever. Um, but yeah, like not even thinking to expand community there. And also, there's some. I know for me, a lot of times there were some claims of legitimacy that I got to make by saying like, "Oh no, I just go to school out there. Like, I'm not like, I haven't forgotten anything about the city or Northeast Portland. Like, I just we just go out there to sleep and to rest and have that ease, right?" Um, but it is important to know when I met Miss Denise, I was kind of like, oh wow, like this has been happening all this time. Um, so yeah, it's again, you learn and you make these random encounters and you get the full story, which you think you have, right? Because you like are the one experiencing it, or it's like, oh no, like I know what it means to be a black person like Oswego, and it's like there were probably a few other clusters of people um, having maybe similar experiences, but also different ones. And so to get further and further um, away to learn more, right, is always an interesting thing. But I guess you never really um, know much about anything until you leave it, right? Until you get beyond the bubble. And so, uh, yeah, it's an everyday thing, I think, for me.
And that part you mentioned about just like the claims of legitimacy and kind of like, navigating being kind of like in these two different spaces is
Yeah.
it's something I definitely still feel like I wrestle with, even though I've been, around him 34. But it's yeah, can you just talk a little bit more about not so much like how, but like how do I put it? It just I feel like it is something in terms of finding peace with kind of like existing in or having like existed in these kind of like two worlds and
Oh my
trying to
God.
like
Yeah.
explain that to people.
I'm gonna like, I will put this out to the chagrin of myself and everyone else. When I need to like pull away from something that I feel is like, not up to snuff, and people like, oh, so and so, or you did that. Like, I'm from like Oswego. I have no idea what you're talking about. That was not at all my experience. Oh my God. When people start repping like Jeff and doing all this stuff, I'm like, I'm sorry, that just I don't know what you mean by that. That isn't a demo. What do you so like I play it up, right, when I need to. And then on the other hand, when I need to like have some Portland street cred, I'm like, I'm from Best Kaiser, I'm from Northeast Portland, whatever needs to happen. And so that I don't know if that piece will ever like completely exist. Um, because I do play with the both sides when I need to, um, and I think there are just as many. I wasn't really playing basketball. I wasn't really a manager either, but I had like friends and cousins and like Cisco kids, and so I was like going on those trips with them, and like seeing like that side of like basketball specifically, um, but really, going to school in Lake Oswego. And so that time of life, I think they were such formative years. And I can't actually make the claim. It's not like you like, oh, like let go, like what you mean? I'm like, Waluga Junior High School, and then people like, oh, okay, like let me fall back. I'm like, yeah, we definitely were at the Muni playing golf and like, doing this whole thing. And I'm still like friends with so many um of my peers from there. But I think here's a moment of, if not peace, a strange confusion. I'm on the number 4 bus a few years back, and I ran into this guy. His name is Jordan. I won't say his last name. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm just heading to my apartments on Cook." And I was like, "You're heading to your apartments on Cook?" And we grew up in Lake Oswego together, and now you've moved into Cook, like off of Williams. Like you're in this area that I think some of our um, I'll be honest, like our ability, right, to go into like Oswego was like the property and the things that we had in Northeast Portland, right? And so to see literally the kids who would be like, "Oh, I went to Portland this weekend," and that was like a vacation, right, from like Oswego, or like, "Oh, we're going to go to the city, and they have like this there and that there," and I'm like, "Okay, I do that every day." Like we literally, are going back and forth into the city often. Um, to see that weird switch that right now these suburban kids want the city life, um and it's new to them, and like it's actually the site of the gentrification, and like the ease of white flight, right, the ability that like as soon as we deem that like, oh, it's not cool to live in a white enclave anymore, we'll just go back to this like area that like our grandparents probably were from anyway, right? And so that exchange, perhaps, like maybe that racialized um sort of identity of living. We always are talking about folks being pushed out, and not no one was pushed out to like Oswego, of course. But that sort of exchange, I suppose, um of seeing that weight, like we are all the direct like stories of these um major and easy to write about concepts of, okay, white flight happens, and then you get gentrification, which is right return, and then you have these students though, or these kids who like don't really know like what's going on, but then in the ability of adulthood to make one's own decisions, you see that we might often not make the most um, profound choices for where we or radical, I should say, right? Radical or profound or deep choices about where we choose to live. But can I say anything different about my parents' desire to live in like Oswego, or that ease, or like, what did we um, get from saying, hey, like when we go home, we want to be at home. We didn't, so much want that constant knocking on the door. I was in the neighborhood. No, you weren't. Like you were never in the neighborhood. Like so, you're like, there's no reason for you to be out here. And so watching that happen was so interesting. I was like, Jordan, you would never be on Williams Avenue 10 years ago. Like this, the number 4, like you would have never been on this bus. Like that just would have never been your story. Um, and me having like had that experience, I remember, so the 35 is the most interesting transit line, I think, in the city of Portland, because it goes from two sort of bubble like enclaves on the like this pristine waters, right? You got the University of Portland, like North Portland Bluffs, and then like Lake Oswego. And I think it might even go to Oregon City, but in between all of these places, you literally go from like hardcore, North Portland into like Oswego on one bus within an hour. Like it can literally happen so quickly. So high school, I'm like walking across 43 at 5:30 in the morning to get on 35 to get to De La Salle in North Portland. And that's when I really started clicking with things. I'm like literally watching property values sort of decrease as you come out of the trees, right, that we take for granted, into cities, and then like apartment buildings that get like smaller and smaller. And now I'm on Denver Street from Ash, and like I see, I'm like, these are different realities. And I think that that like ninth grade year, leaving Lake Oswego and going to De La Salle in my Birkenstocks and my Bostons, and be like roasting me, like, what are those? And so like that experience, but then coming full circle to see like, hey, the white people are returning to the area that you thought wasn't suitable, or that we deemed, um, excuse me, let me fix that, because I want to say um, that we were made to think was not suitable. Because there's another like layer to that story for me, with my grandmother's work in the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods, or literally development of that organization. So I have all the intersections kind of living like right through me. And so it's always interesting to start to unpack this in my relationship to place. Really, it's a conversation, right? As a whole, like, what does place mean? And how does it develop or determine who we become? It might be a two-part thing.
Yeah, I mean that's honestly there's a lot to kind of unpack there, but even just it's funny you talk about just being roasted for the Birkenstocks, because again, as someone who is to this day, I feel like aggressively underdressed wherever I go, you know, I definitely remember when I was in briefly in rites of passage in the prospective gents program,
Yes,
and
yes. So you were out
yeah,
there on those shrub, the beautiful, side of the bluffs. Yeah,
yeah, and I was like, a bunch of the kids who I was in, at least our gents class, also went to De La Salle, so
yeah,
that was interesting. But yeah, so I remember, I was coming after school the same way, because honestly, going to school in LO and kind of being there, like I'm engaged as far as just like doing the schoolwork. I play
yeah.
basketball and all that, but also like I definitely wasn't, I showed up to school. I put on these weird Costco sweatpants and weird slip-on Skechers and just came, just was
Yeah.
there. Like no one's gonna, the same way I might, I'm definitely gonna put on lotion today if I'm going to gents. I'm gonna do all this other stuff. Like no one,
That you don't
no,
have to do
no,
that.
yeah, no white people. At least I actually I'm not gonna say that. I don't put anything past anyone, but at least at the
You weren't
time I
gonna
was
get
like,
called ashy at, yeah.
yeah, like that. I don't think they had the lexicon or frame of reference for that.
Right.
You know, God knows
No, that's
someone
so
may.
funny. I think about this all the time. I think that 6:30 or 7 o'clock hour, literally, of the call, right, was like commute time for us. And I remember multiple, like, I don't know, I wouldn't call them taps. I don't want to make it too thing too. I mean, but it is a sort of a fraternity, right? Or it was preparing you for that sort of preparation. And so, yeah, Mr. Fuller is one of my favorite people in the world. And I just remember always missing the call. And like, I would see it and I'd be like, okay, I gotta be over there. But so I'm like, we are going to Kaiser Permanente, getting your mother and going home. Like, I don't know what, like, we're not adding. I mean, the high school is already, right, this long commute to get over there super early to do like leadership and stuff, and then get back home to like, oh, so it just wasn't happening. So I wish I could have been with you all, but I missed the call. And I mean, it was a very impactful program. I still run into so many people who are like, "Oh, wait, you know this guy?" Like, "Oh yeah, I met them in PGC," and so it's a very interesting connection to have. But perhaps we all got the exposure that we needed, right? You were in high school out there. Um, I didn't know. I'm not saying that I didn't need the gents, right? But I was with them all the time at school, and so it was an interesting exchange, kind of an opposite thing there.
Yeah, yeah, and I also dropped out of the program in 10th grade, so I can. Oh, I always say so much, but also same thing. It's like I still see people. It's funny. I do these residencies in Portland Public Schools, and the last teacher I was with, Desmond Span, I'll just shout out, was also a gent years before us. And I didn't discover that until we were kind of just on a planning meeting and it came up. But you also throw the
Wow.
idea out there that I'm just gonna spread here, which is the idea that there really needs to be a gents or like a bridge builders documentary. So,
Oh,
speak
hey,
that into
yeah,
existence.
that would be. Oh, and I'm so man, I miss every like Kwanzaa gala because we were like either in church or whatever. And so I remember that being, I mean, with all intents and purposes, right? Um, a rite of passage for a certain sort of, and let's kind of be true to the truth with it, like a certain at least in interest stratifying, right? Lifting communities as we climb type of thing. Like that was a certain a requirement for um a certain legible black masculinity within the city at the time, especially. And so missing out on that, then you have like kind of not the stain, but the oh they out in Lake Oswego, like their kids ain't in the chance, like all these things. And like again, like that tension of having to prove and reprove because the gents could be the black card in some ways. And then um yeah, to just kind of counteract all of those things. So I am definitely always uh looking back like, dang, I could have tried to like get to the call. My cousin LaQuay was in I Love, and so she would come Sundays, that heavy cotton dress on her. I'd be like, she's like, I gotta go to Imani service. Am I talking right? And so watching yeah, like kind of missing out, but just one step away.
So yeah, with the gents, I think is I think honestly, you talk about being like just like right there next to the program so much of this time. And I think it's one of those things where, whether you were in the program or just like touched by something around it, I think that impact is honestly bigger maybe than like the institution itself. I just think of one of my, I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite gents memory, but again, going to school in Lake Oswego, I think again, talking about these intersections, like my mom knew Mr. Fuller and sort of some connection to the program because she was a principal in PPS for a long time. And my dad's friend in West Lynn, his son was in the program for a little bit. So that's kind of like how the path to how I ended up there. But like on the basically like on PPS off days, because most of the kids were in Portland public schools, they would get dressed up in the uniforms, the white shirts, red, black, or not red, black, but like the kente cloth ties, I loves, like sashes and everything, and
Mhm.
just like basically like visit kids not in PPS schools. So one of those days, I think it was freshman year, they come to Lake Oswego,
Mhm.
and I have my white peer. I had forgotten, again, speaking of just being in the Costco sweats and everything
Got the people
on the
talking.
wrong day. Yeah, I've forgotten that. But beyond that was still, because it was still just, hey, it was good to see everyone. And then the effect it had on my white peers is just one of those things that you don't forget because they have, again,
Came in with
they have no
Wakanda.
concept. They thought they were the nation of Islam. I like it. Just, it was it was wild, but in retrospect, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. But it was just oh yeah, you have no frame of reference for this. I was, TV and like the five of us in the school were like your frame of reference for black people. And then you see this and you don't know what to do with it. But
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And that sense of community too, right? Like I don't know if like folks change afterward, like after seeing that, but um it's a powerful statement to be able like to have to make. And I'm sure, I mean, it was probably different at like you know, a Catholic school or something else, but for you to be out there and like your tribe for all intents and purposes, right, to show up, that I'm sure that, like you said, your favorite memory, I'm sure that's still something you can think back to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I probably should pause saying it's my favorite memory from Jets because I want something to be a little bit more substantive than scaring the white people, but also,
But hey, it's necessary sometimes.
right, right. But yeah, I think the bigger point, kind of like that speaks to really again is just like community and grounding and having just some foundation
Yeah.
in these spaces. And kind of like to that point now, because with respond to racism, we do some work with students, especially students of color in LO schools, kind of like trying to wrestle with these issues. And on one hand, they're far more organized than like I ever was, or I remember kids being when we were going to school. But also, it's still, they're teenagers at times, like literally fighting with administrations.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's not, you know. So to that point, just from your time both there, but then also, and this theme of life after the bubble and kind of like having that perspective and, thinking about some of these things in retrospect. I don't know if there's like any advice you might offer to students, yeah, in the schools now, whether it be Black students in particular, or just students of color in general.
Oh, wow. That's hmm. I do an annual like intensive with um the students at St. Mary's Academy in liberation theology. And so I'm like, this should just be rolling off my tongue, but I usually am actually just pulling on what's in the room. And so it's, I don't know what's, the temperature right now, the day to day. And, for a lot of the work that we have to do with youth, especially, but even with ourselves in these last like 10 years of really, a huge like um awakening, I'll say post Trayvon. Um, you have to often convince people that there is a problem. 'Cause I don't think that I would have responded well to respond to racism when I was in, and I'm not even, I'm saying the language, right? Because I'm like, oh no, these are my friends. We're having a great time. And of course, right, the current times might be, um, and I have seen, right, awakening a new consciousness within the young people, not a new consciousness, but reawakening, what's kind of always been there. But I suppose then, with that said, uh, letting the youth know, like, hey, like, trust the folks around you who are trying to say something to you about what's going on at a deeper level. Because you might not get it now or feel it right now, but um, things sit with you, they'll come back, you'll be reminded. And by the time you understand what happened, folks will not only have gotten away with it, but completely, um, created worlds and societies around it, like, and what perhaps could have been, as we might say, nipped in the bud or interrupted, right? Like that training for interruption is so powerful to learn and have at a young age. And so, yeah, I guess trust, and I know that that is um, sort of the opposite of the tenets of youth culture, right? You rebel, you rage against the machine, you don't give in to what authority says. Parents just don't understand. Um, but for this, and in this time, I think like, yeah, like lean into those folks who are trying to shape your thinking around these issues, because I've gotten into even some direct conversations with like, "Oh, Bart, you're doing too much," or like you're reading too much into it. I'm like, "No, I've read too much into it. Like I've done my work. You're not reading enough. That's the problem, and you don't see what's happening to you." And that's what grown people. Um, so yeah, and hopefully, I mean, I don't know what age you all start that work, and I would love to hear some more. Um, and it's hard that we have to even use the kind of language to say that we're shaping, um, folks that young people that need to be combative or need to be like on, um, on fight mode all the time. But it's a it's a weird time, and I think that there is a lot of importance in um, making making those making them able to have the language and the resources to interrupt and that fighting with administration. What was I just? Have you seen Choir Boy? The
Uh, I haven't.
Okay, it's an interesting play. It's at Portland Center Stage right now, and it kind of deals with um, a black boys' school. Um, and there's some training though, right? In especially like prep spaces, where if you have an issue, you need to be formal about it. You need to go to administration, write these letters, and XYZ. And so I remember even at De La Salle having to write a letter about the policy about dreadlocks and blackness, all these things. Um, but when those systems started, those young people weren't like having to learn how to fight administration to deal with matters of their being in the world. Like, it wasn't, it was, policies around maybe some homework or something. And so having to sit and say, like, oh, like I need inclusion on the basis of my skin color. Or I need to not hear these words, or like, however that goes. It's a whole different um, way of having to be, like to sit up and have to learn the code to exist, right? And needing to um, be in that, engage in that sort of a fight on a regular basis is a lot of work. So I commend the youth of today, and say also, um, listen to Bruce, like take the take the training. And I don't know how, if it's a responsive, if it's proactive, or I don't want to. I can't make a critique of the work being done, but I know that the subject matter is important, and that I would just encourage a trust of what's being shared and presented. And that might be in
Yeah.
general for kids, like and finding people to trust, right? And that's that goes um on our side as God, we're like, the older folks now, which is interesting, right? To sit up and talk about gents, and then kind of watching that full circle thing of being influential in young people's lives, and being able to say like, hey, here's X, Y, and Z. So trust and relationship development, I think, would be my advice to the young people. That's what the question was, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, no, that was you know, I'd say that's a perfect answer because, of course, you said listen to Bruce. I'll take that. But
Right.
but
You
I
can
do
that
think,
can be the clip.
but no, no, I think that is it's tough because, like you said, on our end, as like people have been through, as people who have, yeah, we have the experiences. Now we have a little, access to like resources, other people, where it's on us to one like build these support systems that can uh can support these students in this, but also, yeah, just it is important. And like you said, it's hard. And I think same way I think about myself at that age and how I would have responded to this program, or what programs I did respond to, and all the little minutia and stuff that made things work, both in like the messaging, but then in just other stuff like, you know, is there food at every meeting? Is there, how are
The
we
most,
making sure we're taking care of people, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a great point. And yeah, Bart, just thank you again for taking the time and just sharing your insights for this project. Where, if people want to learn more about your work, where can they find you?
I am hiding. No, I'm kidding. Uh, I'm dealing with that even today, right? Getting this podcast and the timing and showing up, you're kind of in that space of like, oh, do I do I want to be perceived? But no, I'm Fat Pastor Bart on every um social media outlet that I can think of, and LinkedIn included. Um, so yeah, check me out, follow me, send an email. I will, get with them as I can. But yeah, embracing some sort of yeah, dealing with what it means to um be sought after, and taking the opportunities that I think are important, which I did think this was a very important place to share. So yeah, hit me up. I'm on I'm on everything Fat Pastor Bart. Um, for the most part, pretty accessible, but yeah, that's where people can find me. And there's a bunch of work um, now more than ever, I think, um, on like Google and stuff. There's writings and podcasts and previous things that I've been involved in. Um, yeah, that can kind of get folks acquainted with it.
Awesome. Well, Bart Fitzgerald, thank you again for taking the time today. And yeah, it's sunny out, so hopefully, hopefully, you get to enjoy some of this good weather too.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.